Good afternoon, everyone. I will call this a regularly scheduled meeting of the Public Safety and Emergency Management Committee today, which is February 15th, 2018. I am the chair of this committee. My name is Councilmember Alondra Cano, and we are joined here today by Councilmembers Jeremiah Ellison, Council Vice President Andrea Jenkins, Councilmember Steve Fletcher, who's also the vice chair of our committee, and Councilmember Lene Palmisano. So we are indeed a quorum of the committee and can therefore conduct the committee business. On today's agenda, we have 3 consent items and 2 items for discussion. So we will go through those briefly before approving them. Our first consent item is a contract with Hennepin Technical College for training of police cadets. Our second item is a contract with Hennepin Healthcare Systems to be the sole provider of emergency medical services, EMS training programs. Item number 3 is a gift acceptance of exercise equipment from Anytime Fitness to the Minneapolis Fire Department. And then we have 2 items for discussion, which involve the Minneapolis Police Department response to a quarterly reporting staff direction and the findings of the MPD body-worn camera program audit, as well as item number 5, which is an internal audit progress report on body-worn camera program audit issues. Do folks have any questions on the agenda items today before I move the consent agenda forward for approval? We have one question from Councilmember Lene Palmisano.
Madam Chair, I think there might be some questions about item number 1. So if we could just pull that from consent, or we can just talk about it and then do them all together.
Yep, sounds good. So let's go ahead and move item number 1, which is the contract with Hennepin Technical College for training of police cadets, down to an item for discussion. And with that, let's go ahead and move forward the 2 consent agenda items. All those in approval of moving those items forward, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed, please say no. Those items are approved. So in the discussion item then, we will go ahead and open up a conversation on contract with Hennepin Technical College for training of police cadets. Any questions or discussions on that? Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just, for the benefit of some of my newer colleagues, and there might not be some, it looks like there's someone here ready to speak to this, but my question isn't financial as much as it is in how, could someone just review for us the 3 different ways that our officers become officers, not in any detail, but the 3 paths to become an officer, because this is one of those, I believe. And then secondly, I'm just curious, because there are constituents calling and asking, what is the process for updating or modifying that curriculum, and have there been any changes made, generally speaking, in the last year? Is there anyone here that can speak with that? Otherwise, I can take this offline if needed.
So if I can just have you come forward to the microphone so we can hear.
Madam Chair Cano and Councilmember Palmisano, I can speak to the first part as far as I'm Deputy Chief Howerson with the Minneapolis Police Department. I can speak to the first part about the ways people become police officers. We employ them. So our first way is through the CSO process. So people are hired as CSOs to kind of basically learn their job. They come on usually with no educational background or with some educational background to law enforcement. And then we employ them to learn the roles and responsibilities of a police officer, kind of get on the job training to be a police officer. We pay for them to go to their schooling if they need education. And they're employed for up to 3 years as a CSO. The idea is that it's almost like a feeder system that we bring them in so they get to know the department, get to know some of the workings of the police department, and then they, upon passing the educational background to be a law enforcement, getting their license, then usually are offered a conditional job offer to become a police officer. Second way we go about bringing people into the department is through the Cadet Program. The Cadet Program traditionally reaches out to non-traditional law enforcement students. It's an idea for people with educational backgrounds, with different types of life experiences to become a police officer. So people who go through the Cadet Program usually have maybe have worked in another area for several years or possibly 20 years. Maybe they worked in the private sector, maybe they worked in teaching, or maybe they worked as a factory worker. But they can come on, get hired through the Cadet Program. We give them basically their associate's degree in law enforcement. Then we get them licensed through the post board, and then we send them through the Minneapolis Academy. It's traditionally about an 8 to 9 month process. And then the third way is just hiring officers that have already received their training. They're usually your recruits, people who have gone to law enforcement schools, who have received their education in law enforcement, their degrees in law enforcement, either the associate's arts degree or a bachelor's degree. And then they are usually brought on and already licensed, or at least have the ability to be licensed, receive their licensure, and then receive the Minneapolis Academy and are hired on as police officers. So the three ways: CSOs, cadets, and recruits.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. And then this specific contract with Hennepin Technical College, it says for training of police cadets. So is that the second way that you showed, the non-traditional students that have other work experience, and this is the officer part of their
I believe so. I will let the other representatives speak to that.
Committee Chair, Council Member. As far as the process for developing the contract and what requirements are to be met by the trainers, there's been a lot of change in that, especially in the past year. The Police Officer Standard and Training Board, the state board that licenses officers, has been going through and determining that there are a lot more, there's a lot more need in certain areas like use of force and such. So they are requiring basically more credits in some of these fields. And that is one of the things that is increasing the cost of our training. And also they are requiring that the schools that are more certified to provide training, I think Alexandria is one. I know there are 3 or 4 schools in the state that basically can certify officers under the post-training conditions. And so there's that oversight from the state board that requires what our training is. And then we additionally, once we get them as recruits, we do an in-house academy. Mm-hmm. But the state determines what the requirements are.
Thank you. So if I may, Madam Chair, this is pertinent to the cadet program, so the second pathway to become a peace officer. And this is really more their state-specific post-type training, and then we do our own in our own police academy after that.
Correct, yes.
Got it. Is there an opportunity to modify that program or to make changes that we still satisfy all the post requirements, but we might be going above and beyond, or we might be providing additional opportunities for different kinds of skill development?
We used to be able to do a lot of our own training kind of under the umbrella of, the post through Hennepin Technical College, but they've removed that opportunity from us now. They're requiring basically for state licensure that the, in this case, Hennepin County Tech or Hennepin Technical College basically does all the training. They control the training. They control the trainers who they hire to do the training. Where we used to be able to do some in-house training, we're not allowed to do that anymore. And so it's strictly under their control. If we're doing additional training, it has to be in the police academy that follows.
Okay. Thank you.
We have another question from Councilmember Andrea Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question, I think may be able to be answered by Deputy Chief Howardson, but maybe you as well, ma'am. So how long is the CSO program and the Cadets program? I'm not sure if I understood the length of time.
Yes, Madam Chair, Councilmember Jenkins, I can respond to that. So the difference is for the CSOs, we have up to 3 years to train them and get them ready to be a police officer. Now that can vary in time frame from when they become a police officer, depending on when they come to us and what amount of training or what amount of education they have. So they could have gone to a college that offers their law enforcement training, and they could have received their license or their education. They could have finished it, or they could have been midway through it. So we hire them with the idea that they're going to be a police officer, and they have 3 years, up to 3 years to finish that training and then become licensed. So with the cadet program, it's a little bit different thought process, or a little bit different way to get through there. The cadet program, people come in with basically no law enforcement background. They come in not working in law enforcement. They come in not having any a license, post license, and we basically train them to receive their education in law enforcement. At least the 2-year degree is what they get, kind of in a more intense setting in about a 3-month process, and then they receive the post licensing. They have to attend the post to receive the training through them. And then after that, they are licensed and they become police officers, and then we run them through our academy. And that process lasts approximately 8 months, 8 to 9 months at the most.
Thank you. So it's about a year-long process, 3 months plus
For
another
the cadet,
8 months.
I'm sorry, for the cadets, approximately 8 months, a little bit more, 8 months, maybe a week or two after that.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I'm wondering, you mentioned they get an associate's degree in law enforcement from Hennepin Technical College, and I'm wondering if there are any requirements, thematic requirements or elective requirements related to Hennepin Technical College's associate's degree. So, for example, are we asking our officers to take courses in global perspectives, or courses related to race, gender, or sexuality, or other kinds of training that we might want them to have for interfacing with the diversity of our population?
Madam Chair, Councilmember, my understanding is that the post requirements do get into some of those wider disciplines about how to deal with the public, how to deal with, certain populations, skills that they need for responding to people. I don't have a list of all the courses that are required, but I know that it's broader than just the basic that you think that an officer would need. It's, the people skills as well.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question, twofold. One is about recruitment into the program, and I guess, which is kind of a demographic question. There's a lot of, I think, demand, but I know we can't, make officers live in the city. But to what extent are people being recruited into this program from places like North Minneapolis? To what extent are we recruiting African American, Indigenous, and Latino officers into programs like this pathway?
Madam Chair, Councilmember, I'm not sure I have the most information on this, but I know that the CSO and the cadet programs do bring in a lot of minority and persons of color into our department that we wouldn't otherwise have.
Madam Chair, Cano and Councilmember Ellison, I can respond a little bit to that. That is, recruitment falls under the Chief of Staff, but I do know some of it a little bit, so I can speak a little bit to it. The recruitment does go out to a lot of different areas. They focus primarily within the metro area and somewhat a little bit outer ring with the 5-state area. They go to, within Minneapolis, there's a lot of different career fairs that they attempt to go and recruit people from Minneapolis. I do know that they hit some of the high schools, they hit some of the college fairs for recruitment. And I do know that from the chief down to Deputy Chief Knight, who was the chief of staff, it's one of their primary goals, one of their primary ideas is to work on diversifying our ranks through recruitment.
Thank you. Oh, I guess last question is how successful do you think how successful do you think it's been, and what kind of support would you need to get the ideal outcome?
With Madam Chair Cano and Councilmember Councilmember Ellison, without knowing the numbers, I really wouldn't want to put I don't know if I could put a success rate or what exactly is happening with it. I don't know the numbers. Possibly it's something you could bring Deputy Chief Knight here to discuss about. But I do know that Deputy Chief Knight has really reached out to a lot of different groups and committees to try to help with that. It's been one thing refreshing with this administration is that we have touched base with a lot of different areas in the city that I think we might not have had a connection with before. That has helped out. That's helped him out quite a bit. And I'm sure that it's a item or discussion that he could probably have with this committee for some ideas that he could use or employ to reach those members.
Would it be? Could I ask you all to pull that kind of information? Maybe knowing sort of what the demographics are, both geographically and racially, so that we could have so that this body could have that information, and just so we're kind of in the know.
Madam Chair Cano and Councilmember Ellison, yeah, it's definitely something that I think we could have. You could reach out to Deputy Chief Knight, and he could probably get that information for you.
Cool. Thank you.
Alrighty, I'm checking for more questions. And Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Oh, I'm sorry, you just sat down. This might be a better question for Deputy Chief Knight, and so I can wait, but I'm just, something that I asked a few years ago to Chief Janae Harteau was about the 3 different paths to become a peace officer for Minneapolis, and how those are seen as doing, like how our peace officers that have come through these different paths are performing. And I would be curious to know what reasonable metrics those could be, whether it's about discipline that they need to receive then as an employee, or whether they have a longstanding career as a peace officer in our program. I believe that at the time I asked it, a couple of these pathways were so new, there was no way to gauge that. But Deputy Chief Halverson, knowing that this is probably a question better suited for Deputy Chief Knight, how many years of experience do we have with these 3 pathways? Or if you don't know, we can consider it offline. I'm just curious as to how, is there a way to track that one of these pathways might be better in terms of a peace officer's well-being and success on the job?
Yes, Madam Chair Cano and Councilmember Palmisano. So the traditional way to hire police officers has been through, obviously, the recruits. It's been a long-standing practice that we've had hiring people who have received their training in their educational background and their training. That has been the process we've used, and most departments have used for a very long time. I can talk to you as far as the cadet program. I actually came on through the cadet program back in 1992, and I was in the 2nd class. So the cadet program to Minneapolis has been here. So we're looking at 26 years. So it's been a process that has stood the test of time. And again, a way to reach people who might not have that idea of law enforcement, but may have that life experience or have that idea of another vocation or profession not working out for them, and feeling that this may be something they want to try and something they want to do. So the cadet program has really been it's been adopted. It's done through I believe the State Patrol does it, and I believe that there's actually a state academy for a cadet program. So it's really been a good feeder system for us to grab people with different perspectives coming into this profession. The CSO program, I would be guesstimating here, but I know that it kind of started gathering and taking off probably in the mid 90s, early 90s, around the same time. Again, with the idea of bringing people in to the fold, bringing people into your department, bring them in so they understand a little bit more about law enforcement, understand the organization, understand what it takes or what it will be to be a police officer. Give them some experience, give them a idea what it's like, and giving them to kind of a jump start to learn some of the skills by meeting people and by doing some of the tasks that that could be taken away from police officers that need to respond to incidents and respond to calls. So they've all been all ways we do bring people in. Again, have been around for a while here with Minneapolis, and maybe continue to go through some little modifications here and there, but have really stood the test of time.
Thank you. I stand corrected. These have all been tried and true paths to becoming peace officers. So thanks for that information.
Do we have any more questions? I can't tell because sometimes if you don't have questions, just put your little thing down. Or I'm in speaker management as well. Well, thank you for that. So with no further questions on that item, let's go ahead and approve the contract with Hennepin Technical College for training of police cadets. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no, and so that item moves forward. I did just want to mention that some of the questions that were shared here today are in direct relationship to our committee's work to develop our 4-year work plan, which will also be integrated with each department's business plan, which should involve some more specific details about the goals and sort of vision, for the types of initiatives that each department that reports to this committee has, which relates to Councilmember Ellison's question around what is the sort of metric or outcome that we're trying to see through some of these training programs. So in March and in early April, we will be diving deep with our community to look at our work plan, and we're working with our mayor's office as well to put that together. So by I would say April, the meeting in April, we should have a 4-year work plan that we review here in our committee and approve, where we can identify more specific time to delve into these issues of training, diversifying our workforce, and supporting our police officers to work safely and healthily in collaboration with our residents. So let's go ahead and get into the meatier subjects here, which is let's go towards number 4 on our discussion agenda, which is the Minneapolis Police Department response to the quarterly reporting staff direction and the findings of the MPD body-worn camera program audit. And there are 2 items under this specific issue, and one will be approving MPD's recommended metrics and deadlines for quarterly reporting beginning in quarter 2 of 2018, which will report on quarter 1, and then we will receive and file a report from MPD regarding the operation of body-worn cameras, information on the findings outlined in the Minneapolis Police Department Mobile and Body-Worn Video Recording Equipment Program Audit Report, and on supervisor reviews of body-worn camera footage. So please take it away.
Okay, Madam Chair Cano and council members. I appreciate the opportunity to come speak to you about this. I can tell you that the information that we received from this audit, I think to the department and to the citizens of Minneapolis, the people, was very eye-opening. We took the information, gathered, and we worked well with the internal audit unit to address it and to work on the issues. So moving on through this presentation, I can tell you the objectives is I will be covering the 6 major parts of the audit, including the policy on compliance, policy compliance and clarity, body-worn camera systems access, managing data requests, training, and mobile video systems access. After that, I will go into a little bit further discussion on the quarterly metrics. So first of all, from the report, so to refresh people's memory on it, the first major issue that was addressed in the audit report was the policy non-compliance. So as you see there, we had an issue that was reported by the audit committee that some of the officers were not being required to use body-worn cameras, even though the policy required their use. The example there you see is that our SWAT officers were not using them, but even though technically per the policy they were required to use them. Some of the 911 dispatches and use of force events did not have corresponding body-worn, I'll say BWC just to keep it shorter. BWC is body-worn camera. BWC video and evidence.com, where video did not exist. There was inconsistent entry of explanation why this occurred in CAD or CAPRs. Now, evidence.com is the software from the vendor we use for our body-worn cameras. Axon is the vendor we use. CAD is our computer-aided dispatch, which is used to send out this, information to the mobile data terminals for the officers in the squads. And CAPRs is our records management system, which we do use to capture reports. Another issue under this item was that officers were not consistently running BWC startup checks and doing some startup checks away from the precinct. So per the policy, officers are required to do startup checks, meaning testing the video, testing that it's working. Officers were occasionally leaving their BWCs powered off until just before activation, preventing pre-event recording from fully functioning. So it means that officers were wearing the body cam, however, they were leaving it in the off position. And then when they had an incident or when they arrived and decided they needed it, they would turn it on and it would be powered up. And normally when an officer has a body-worn camera on and they hit the button to start it, there's a buffer of 20 to 22 seconds, which it captures before. However, when it's off, it's only 5 seconds that it will capture prior to when they turn it on. Officers transporting individuals to jail frequently deactivated BWCs prior to transferring custody. This was also observed with the MBRs, the mobile video cameras, which are the ones in the squad cars. Officers were not consistently narrating the reasons for BWC deactivation prior to event conclusion, so officers were not stating on camera why they were turning it off. Officers were not consistently categorizing BWC videos, including not assigning any categories or assigning incorrect categories. So when officers uploaded the camera or uploaded the video, sometimes that was being miscategorized or not given a category. Officers were not consistently entering the correct case numbers related to BWC videos. Again, this is through our CAD system. Calls are assigned a case number, and then this is a case number that they would use to associate the video with the CAPRs or the CAD number, CAD case number. Officers were not consistently uploading BWC videos at the end of their shift. and supervisors were not conducting reviews of BWC use, and supervisors were not trained on conducting reviews until June of 2017. Now, before I start delving into the responses, and our first response to this, I want to let you guys, I want to inform you guys that, I started after the audit, after we received the audit, I started a work group with some members from our R&D department, from members from the internal audit, and then I also had a legal analyst from OPCR, where we sat down and hammered out the issues with within the audit, within the body, or within the policy from the audit. These occurred approximately bi-weekly. We sat down for an hour or two and discussed certain issues. We currently do have a draft policy completed. At this time, we are having internal stakeholders review that to give us a little more feedback on that information on that policy. And the hope is to have that feedback from these groups back by the end of March and have the policy in place by March. So our response to these first issues is that, again, or as you can see, we're revising the policy language to clarify responsibilities, use, and review expectations. Upon policy finalization, MPD will update training materials to be in line with the policy and will inform or train as appropriate all the staff necessary. We're looking to have this done by possibly by Q3 of 2018. MPD is employing civilian staff as part of the program to review BWC footage and ensure compliance with BWC policy. These reviews will include identifying instances of activation, deactivation not occurring in line with policy, documentation of deactivation missing footage not occurring in line with policy, startup checks, data not uploaded, categorized, and labeled in line with policy, and we're looking to have this done by the end of Q2. Now, the part of our budget for this year, we were given some funds to be able to hire 2 civilian staff to assist with this program. We are currently in the process of hiring those civilian staff. They will work in the quality assurance unit, which is under my Bureau of Professional Standards. Commander Granger, who runs that unit, is here today with me and informed me that he's looking to possibly have one of the people in place by March, and the other person is still running through background checks because some of this information is CJIS data, and we need to have backgrounds completed on people who review this information. So to have these people in place, to the civilian partners to review the BWC footage, we're hoping to have them in place by at least the end of March, and then there will be some training that they'll have to go through and some kind of on-the-job knowledge they'll have to gain. So moving on to the second issue within the audit report was policy completeness and clarity report. So as you see, the BWC policy focused on the MPD's use of camera equipment and software. The following issues were not completely addressed in policy. The connection of statute required data classifications to categories used by the MPD. This is meaning that per state statutes regarding the electronic recording devices, BWCs, certain types of videos are public and non-public. Some categories used were not addressed in policy, meaning that certain requirements by statute were not listed in policy. Addressing security breach notifications and security safeguards, again, was not in policy, addressing issues such as security notifications, safeguards, notice to data subjects, and authorizations to access data and procedures. Addressing notices to data subjects, circumstances when a data subject must be given notice to a recording and when it's being released. Addressing authorization to access data and access procedures. This includes a written requirement to access the body-worn camera data. And addressing video classification assignment. Again, when a video is uploaded, ensuring that it has a determination of being public or non-public.
Excuse me, Deputy Chief, we
Yes.
have a question from Councilmember Palmisano.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Deputy Chief, I'm just curious, and I assume that if I'm a little bit confused, maybe some of my colleagues are as well. Are you saying that the policy, the prior policy, not your draft that's, in process of being refined, but you're saying the former policy did not address these issues?
It's not, on some of them, they did not address them, but there's some that just needed more clarity.
I
And
see.
most of it needs more clarity.
Okay, so what you're saying is these are the kind of the areas that you focused on in the revision of policy?
Yes.
Okay, super, thanks.
So continuing with policy completeness and clarity of the report. In addition, state statute compliance gaps, certain areas of policy could be clarified or enhanced to provide more information and guidance. The BWC policy allowed turning off cameras when necessary to discuss issues in private, but did not provide guidance for what a necessary circumstances was. The BWC policy does not address using multiple categories for videos. So some of the categories that are in the software or that are in the policy are just as some examples: as a significant event, arrest evidence, training, non-evidence, general recording. So there's certain incidents where an officer responds, records something, and it could fit multiple categories. And the policy didn't address in what categories should go or how to put it in multiple categories. The BWC program allowed for retention of training videos for only 90 days when the next shortest period was 1 year. Additional information on redaction and withholding of subject and offensive information to fully cover compliance with state statutes. So this was clarification to our records unit on data requests and redaction. Additional information on data retention to fully cover compliance with state statutes. This would be a clarification in policy for data subjects on requests of the data and notifying them that the subjects within the video.
Deputy Chief, could you please change the PowerPoint?
I'm sorry, yes.
Thank you.
And finally, the ability to access data by subjects of the data and notification to data subjects. The MPD's response to these is that, again, we're revising the policy language to clarify responsibilities, use, and supervisory review expectations. This is expected completion by the end of Q1 2018. Upon policy finalization, MPD will update training materials and be in line with policy and will inform or train as appropriate all staff. Expected completion Q2 of 2018. So moving on to the next issue was body-worn camera system access. Multi-factor, from the report, multi-factor authentication was not required for all users of evidence.com. It was only required for administrators, not for the users. So the multi-factor authentication is when you sign in, log into some site, you maybe need your email address and then a password, and then you need a second type of way to confirm your the person that you're signing in, be it a number received through text or through email. Evidence.com, again, that's the evidence.com is the software which our vendor uses. Evidence.com access control procedures were not documented. So there were no written approvals, were not obtained prior to provisioning user access to evidence.com. as is required by state statute. There is no periodic access to review the process, so we didn't review the process on who had access. And one user with administrative access did not need that level of access for the current job, which has since been changed and removed. So our response to these issues is we're considering the impact of multi-factor authorization of users on users and determine whether enabling this feature for all users is practical. This is a discussion we would have to have with Axon, the vendor we use for our mobile, for our body-worn cameras, to see what they would have in place to have a multi-factor authentication for people to sign on and log on. We're revising the policy, which will include documentation of the access control procedures, requirement of written approvals for access to the data storage system, periodic access reviews by the quality assurance unit, and expected completion of that is by Q1. I envision that this section will be reviewed by Commander Granger and his unit, and the people, the civilian personnel that he will have in place to assist us with some of the auditing functions. Oh, I'm sorry. So continued response is that upon policy finalization, the MPD will update training materials to be in line with policy and will inform or train as appropriate all staff. Expected completion by end of Q2 that might be a little ahead of the time, depending on the finalization of policy and when we can get the training done. MPD will obtain written approval for all current users with access. This one should not be too difficult to get people's signatures on documents. MPD has removed the administrative access for that user that had that was not authorized to have the that was not an administrator. So moving on to the fourth major issue within the audit report is that requests for BWC data from law enforcement and data subjects were not centrally managed and not uniformly documented. To ensure a complete documented population of all requests exists, MPD could enhance the data sharing process by routing all data requests to a centralized group, such as the Records Information Unit, and limiting the ability to share data to that group. So our response is that as a department, we need to facilitate a discussion between the Records Unit, which is within our department, and the City Attorney's Office on centralizing that data, those data requests and data sharing process. This discussion will identify differences in records of such requests and how data sharing can be more uniformly documented to track compliance with state statutes. Again, this discussion we need to have as a record unit, which is within my bureau with the City Attorney's Office, to try to get all on the same page about data requests. The fifth issue within the audit, training. So from the report, written training materials did not cover some aspects of the BWC policy, including specific steps to take when equipment malfunctions, notifying supervisors of video with administrative value, and using BWC in conjunction with the MVR, which is our videos, our squads, our videos in the squads. So we will update our training materials to incorporate those identified items, as well as any items from the policy revision. Expected completion by the end of Q2 2018. The fifth issue within the, the sixth issue within the data for the audit is that the mobile video systems access. So again, the vendor that we use, Axon.com, and their software, Evidence.com, the vendor contracted by the city to administer its network and servers had administrative access to the server that stores unarchived data, unarchived mobile video data. While the vendor needed administrative access, the city should monitor the activity of the vendor on this server when the access is made. So our response to this is that we're requesting the internal audit to communicate this finding with city IT staff to determine the appropriate mitigation. So because it's not the software that we use for the mobile video is I cannot remember right now the mobile video software that we use, but it is different than Axon. But we're asking IT to have that conversation with them to ensure that the people reviewing it with that company are the people that need to have it, not that it's getting out, and not that there's unauthorized people viewing that video. So that concludes our response to the issues within the audit. And if you guys have any questions about it, I can address hopefully whatever questions you have regarding the audit and our response before I move on to the issue of the quarterly reporting.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. We do have a couple of questions here. We'll go ahead and start with Councilmember Fletcher, and then we'll go with Councilmember Linney.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Deputy Chief, for that presentation. I did go back after our conversation in the agenda setting because you had indicated that you needed some clarification on what we were expecting in terms of a report, and looked at the staff direction that happened on October 14th, and I just wanted to revisit that a little bit because you've answered some of the questions, but not all of them. So I want to just check in on that. So the first question was how often are body cameras not being turned on when dispatch data indicates that they should? You've indicated that that's going to be one of the metrics that you're going to track, but we haven't received a report on that today. The second question, have there been any changes to the body camera policy? You have talked about that, and you've indicated some changes that you've made, and I appreciate that update. That's very helpful information. The third, who's in charge of the ongoing effectiveness of the body camera program? And I think that's the one that I'm hoping you can answer for me, sort of who's driving this work and who owns it. And then the fourth item was what are the emerging themes of the reviewed data and what issues are being identified by supervisors? And I'm hoping that you can. Some of this does sort of characterize that, but I guess I'd like a little bit of additional characterization of just sort of what changes either formally or even just sort of informally and how you guys are thinking about this. If you were going to summarize in sort of plain English, just how is this working and how are, what are you seeing based on the data that you've got so far? I'd appreciate just a little further discussion about that. And I think I'll just say that I think after our conversation, the staff direction feels like it was clear that we wanted the reporting to commence in the first quarter, not the reports to commence based on the first quarter to receive reports in the second quarter. So I do want to make sure that we sort of get these answers to the extent that we can in this meeting and then in follow-ups coming soon.
Yep. Madam Chair Cano and Councilmember Fletcher. So I'll try. It seems like there's a lot in there, so I'll try to answer what I can to you, to what you asked, and if there's something that I'm missing, just feel free. So I think without giving information on the because it's a draft policy, without giving detailed information on the draft policy, these issues that are addressed, or all these issues and the reporting on the performance as far as like the activation, deactivation, startup checks that were addressed in the audit report. They are the specific items that we address primarily within this work group and changed or clarified within the policy. This was our main, the audit was our main driving force behind us to address or clarify these issues within policy. So we touched upon all of them. And along with some other issues that were not in here, but we had heard from other officers or different departments within the city to address. I'm fairly confident that we addressed all these issues with what we need to do, one, per state statute, and two, as far as what we believe is necessary to assist us in giving that transparent view to the public and to our citizens. As far as your question about the quarterly reports, I think maybe that's a discussion we have down here on the next topic, and we may have a way around what and to be able to answer what you would like or what we were directed to do. But I feel really confident. We had a very good relationship with internal audit. Again, we were very pleased that this information was brought to us. So it's something we can address and something we can work on and make better. I think we've done that. I think the work group has really done a lot of good hard work on this. And hopefully we will be able to show that when we're able to make our policy out there in public.
Great. The one piece of this, and I know I threw a bunch of stuff at you, so I just want to refresh your memory on one question, is who's in charge of the ongoing effectiveness of the body camera program?
Yes, Madam Chair and Councilmember Fletcher. Ultimately, well, the chief, but at his direction, I'm the one that's working on this. This falls within my division. So both parts of it, if you take a look at it, the technical aspect falls within our technology and BTU unit. And the policy also belongs within my division. And then ultimately along that, any discipline issues that we will have from it will fall under internal affairs, which would also fall under my division. So it's been something that I've really delved into here ever since we were given this directive by the internal audit and by the Public Safety Committee from last year. And it's something that I've been working on a lot and working with the work group on to try to make it more effective, make it more clear and a better product for people to understand.
Thank you.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a number of questions, some perhaps more for our auditor. But in general, I want to say how much I appreciate all of the response that you've done here and that you've just shown in your presentation, because not only have you shown the proposed changes to the body camera policy, but you've also talked about changing everything around tightening up how we do data requests, which is really important, and how we do training. And those were not things that, after the audit report was released at the end of September, there were people up here trying to hold your feet to the fire on, for lack of a better word. But I am a little bit concerned about the direction that was given at the end of third quarter last year, I guess officially early October last year. And yet from what you've shared, I wonder, what you've been talking about is how you kind of codify this in policy. Instead, can you share just a little bit verbally on what kinds of things the police department has done about body cameras since the time that Chief Arredondo enacted the body cameras have to be on at dispatch policy change? Because I understand and appreciate there's a learning curve on that. And I know we audited some of that, but not, certainly we're 4.5 months beyond where that last audit stopped. So can you share with us verbally a little bit more about what kinds of things our police department has been doing to try to get more officers in compliance with the existing policy that Arredondo enacted? Thanks.
Madam Chair Cano and Councilmember Palmisano, thank you for that question. So I can tell you a couple of things. First of all, we as an executive group, as the chiefs and assistant chief and deputy chiefs, have gone out to precincts. We've gone out to staff meetings at precincts, one to discuss with this issue, because it is was a major area of questions by the officers. Again, which kind of brought to us some other issues that we needed to address within the policy. We explained to them the policy that we were working on. We're explaining to them why we're doing certain things. So we did go out and have conversations with inspectors, commanders, lieutenants, shift sergeants, and officers about the policy and the importance of it. A second thing I can tell you is that we did have for approximately 6 months within the quality assurance unit. There was an officer that was assigned there to the unit under the direction of Commander Granger, and this officer did almost start off an idea for supervisors audits. I'm sorry, an audit through the quality assurance unit to go through each precinct, gather information from the officers, and present it to the inspectors as far as for performance management. And that information did capture some of the issues within the audit, miscategorization, startup checks, case numbers. That information was given to the inspectors to go back to their officers, their supervisors and officers, and discuss with them. It was kind of a startup project just to see what we could gather or where we could go with this unit. Thirdly, I can tell you that I know Commander Granger has gone out to the supervisors to speak with them about the supervisors' audits. They have all been trained on them. Right now, we do not have anything in place in policy saying that they have to do them. However, that's going to be added to this policy again. It's in the draft policy to get these supervisors to conduct the audits of the precinct, which again will give them a little bit more personal control, a little bit more personal supervision of their people to see what they're doing. And again, to just be part of that management process and that oversight process. So those are 3 things that we have been kind of working on also with this, we've been addressing. But I can tell you that along with those, this policy rewrite has been a major, one of our biggest undertaking.
Thank you. I just want to point that out. I mean, there has been since the end of September, it seems like there has been this work on the permanence and adding this as a discipline to our department. But it seems to me from the more informal conversations that there has been a lot of added rigor and impetus and focus on this precinct to precinct in terms of our quality assurance commanders' conversations with them. The other questions I have, I think, are more directed for our internal audit department. And so I was wondering if Mr. Vasiliev, you could avail yourself to some questions. I think you would probably know them off the top of your head. The first is, could you refresh my and others' memory of how much body-worn camera analysis was done in your audit? Like how many weeks or months, or what was that sample period?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Palmisano, we covered the body camera program from when the first cameras were issued to the first officers in 2016 through about 3.5 weeks after a policy change was put out in, I believe, July or August, changing when activation needed to occur, which made sense for us to do 2 perspectives, one prior to the policy change and one after policy change.
And then, okay, so that answers my second question about, one of the questions was how much before time of the last policy change, how much after the policy change. You're saying any amount of time before and then 3.5 weeks after, because at that point in time is when your audit was due to committee, was mid-September. Is that?
Chair, Councilmember Palmisano, yes. So it was between 9 and 12 months of pre-policy change, depending on when each precinct had the rollout of the cameras by the BTU, and approximately 3.5 weeks after the change.
Thank you. And then did you notice in your audit, and I don't remember off the top of my head, was there an ability to gauge if compliance was getting better through that year according to the policy at the time? Like, was there improvement from when body cameras were first issued to, say June of 2017 in terms of amount of footage captured when it was asked to be on, or when the policy said for these cameras to be on?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Palmisano, I believe we were able to see that there was more footage and there were more individual videos, but based on the way we're able to conduct our review, it would be hard to say that there were fewer, that people were using them appropriately more often, because the way the data was available, it was a manual and time-consuming process to identify an instance in which a video would be expected to exist, and then look for that video and then determine whether or not there's documentation of, say, a broken camera or other reason for not activating. So we sampled time period to see how often that occurred in general, pre and post, but we'd have to redo a substantial amount of work to be able to say in January of 17 it was this rate, in February of 17 it was this rate. We'd have to redo the work to break it out month by month. But again, there's definitely more videos and I believe more hours of footage as time went on.
Thank you. I appreciate that it's been about 4.5 months since this audit really illuminated some gaps and some issues in our body-worn camera program. I appreciate that our police department took this very seriously, and they've added both these more permanent measures and also the measures that Deputy Chief Halverson just outlined. Because of that, I am very wedded to the prior staff direction that does ask to get a sense of how that's going. And I don't know if that would be complete and comprehensive as this last audit was, or whether it would be more of a sampling of data that would be statistically significant. I want to point out that I know that there was a report that was supposed to come back to council on November 29th, which was the last public safety meeting of last year. And that didn't happen. And I think that was kind of that wasn't necessarily police department's fault. There'd been a lot of leadership changes, and I guess everybody kind of dropped the ball on that one. But I am wedded to the idea that we have some level of reporting on how things are going with our body camera audits before the end of the second quarter, knowing that there's all these other stopgap measures coming forward. I'm not sure how to achieve that, and I'm willing to take that offline. But I do want to point that out, is the fact that I think we can't just not have any answers or know how this whole camera program is going for a 4.5 month period, or even longer by the time we would take just first quarter data. Actually, let me restate that. For all of fourth quarter last year, and then wait until sometime in second quarter to hear how first quarter went. I recognize there's a resource problem in terms of how who's going to do that work, but I'm willing to work through that and to see how we might be able to supplement efforts of the police department with resources from audit to help complete that. So I just offer that to my colleagues. Thank you.
All right, I'm not seeing any more questions.
Okay, then, Madam Chair, if I may address the council with this, the request from the last Public Safety Committee from last year regarding quarterly reporting. So, you know what, I do understand, I don't want to sit up here and give you sob stories on why we can't do it, on why we can't give you the information that you should have and that we should be able to give to you. I think that it's a discussion that I can have with internal audit and with Commander Granger of the Quality Assurance Unit, that we can do everything we can to give you those both quantitative measures. So, for instance, such as body number of videos, hour of videos, the officers in the precincts, but also the qualitative measures. And some of those qualitative measures are going along the same lines as the audit on what they captured. Looking at startup checks, what percentage of officers we have doing startup checks, what percentage of officers we don't have doing startup checks. Activation checks, usage checks, ensuring officers are using body cam video when needed per policy. Deactivation checks and categorization and case number checks. So I think it's a discussion I can have with, like I said, with internal audit and with Commander Granger, and that we can bring you a report by the next Public Safety Committee meeting on not just the quantitative, but the qualitative measures. And hopefully this is some of the stuff that I think that would be of use for you. It's some of the stuff that was definitely brought to light within the audit report, and I think can be helpful and useful for us to determine whether we're ensuring our officers are following that policy, and ensuring that we're doing what we ask of them to do and what we expect them to do as employees of the police department and employees of the city of Minneapolis. So I guess I would ask, one, if there's any other information that this committee would recommend for quarterly reporting. And then two, if you were okay with gathering both the information from the quantitative measures prior there in the first slide I had, and then the second, the qualitative or quantitative measures. That is something that we can do. We can, if I have to do it myself with Commander Granger, sit down, we'll work it out, and we will get the information to you.
So, yeah, we do have a couple of questions here. So we'll start with Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate this proposal. This is helpful. Can you go back to the previous slide? There was one thing I wanted to ask about. So the so number of videos, hours of video in precincts, those are metrics that you feel like you can produce with relatively little sort of reporting labor, so that you can get those done fairly quickly. And then it feels like the other thing that's going to be helpful to us in assessing usage is going to be comparing that against situations where by policy it should have been turned on. And so I guess the question that I have is there some sort of a way, I understand that to be a labor-intensive sort of manual matching process, which I assume is why it's not included in this proposal. Is there some way to include at least a list of, or sort of day by day, how many calls there were, how many sort of dispatch calls there were, so that we can see if the data seems to approximately line up with when we would have expected it to use? Is there some sort of way of approximating the data without putting in sort of undue burden on you, so that we can see if we feel like the usage is appropriate?
Madam Chair, and Councilmember Fletcher, I can tell you, so to answer your question, first of all, the quantitative measures, that's relatively easy to gather. That stuff is really not going to be too hard to gather. I could probably do it myself, get it to you. It might take a little time, but I could. That's not going to be the issue. The second part, the quantitative, is going to be a little bit more of a difficult task to do, not impossible, but difficult. In talking to some people who do the audits, it's usually a certain percentage of officers you do within a certain time frame. And it's something we could definitely do to produce these results to kind of go along lines with the audit, kind of exactly kind of the same information they had regarding these issues. And so if we do a certain percentage of officers with a certain amount of time, I think that would be relative to the information they gathered from the audit for the audit report. And with the assistance of the audit, maybe somebody from the audit team, and possibly I do have a good relationship with OPCR, with the OPCR legal analyst. It's something we could possibly work on and get done. Again, the difficult part on this is there's different databases you have to check. You have to check the evidence.com for the video. You check the CAD system to see the call that came in, tappers, because you may need to check for the documentation, and you got to check the video. You got to watch the video, and if there's mobile cam video. So that's the difficult part in making this checking on the quantitative part. But again, I think it's something that if we really work on and we focus on, put to the top of the priority list, is something that we could produce.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to point out that I think that the difference of quantitative monitoring versus qualitative monitoring is really some of the stark difference that was presented back in September in terms of, oh, look how many more hours of footage we have, but wait, they're not on when they're supposed to be on. And so I think it's a little bit difficult to get good quantitative measures that are going to help to be informative and ultimately to be useful to the police department and to give trust to the public. So if to point out on this slide 18, I think the thing most important to the public here is how often are body cameras not being turned on when dispatch data indicates that they should. I don't know that the public cares as much about startup checks and deactivation checks. I do think the public cares deeply about the categorization of footage, and that's because different kinds of categories then mean that footage rolls off after different periods of time, right? And but I think if we could just focus on how often body cameras are on when dispatch data indicates that they should, I think that's a good first step. In terms of this next report, in terms of ongoing, I really avail myself to what's useful for the department to get really good about the discipline of using this as a tool, because it's a difficult tool to use. I would argue it's probably the most complex one in a police officer's tool belt and in their toolkit. I also want to point out something that you mentioned, Deputy Chief, which is that OPCR does have resources available that are also trained in audit, and I think that they also might be able to be really helpful. Part 4 of this former staff direction was about what are the emerging themes of the reviewed data and what issues are being identified by supervisors. I think that you probably have a lot of that information off the cuff from Commander Granger and those that worked with Commander Granger over these past few months. And I'd look forward to those insights perhaps in the near future instead of at the end of the second quarter. So thank you, but that's my comments on this quarterly reporting.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Palmisano, if I may respond to that, I would tend to agree with you that the usage checks is probably the biggest thing to ensure that the officers are using the body cam when they need to be using it, and that it's on when it's supposed to be per policy. But there's a couple other things I think that factor into that is along with having it on, there are certain times that we allow our officers to turn them off. And understanding when that occurs and that's in line with policy, I think is also just as important for that transparency and for that ability to report to our citizens.
Agreed.
Deputy Chief, I do have a question. As we're looking at some of the challenges that we've had in making a smooth transition into adopting this program and this amenity, really, for our residents, this very critical, program that began a few years ago. I'm wondering, have you or has the program in the past, or do we have plans in the future to engage other jurisdictions that have done a similar project or program that we can learn from, that can support us, that can kind of share tips in terms of, how we can move some progress on this front? For example, in some cases, we hire consultants to help us set up certain programs like this. I don't know if we did this with the program when it was initially proposed, but I'm just curious about the interaction of MPD's body cam program with a community of other learners who are also trying to do the same thing, whether it's in Hennepin County or another state. I'm just curious about sort of that interaction between us and folks who have already done these programs and have learned and can help share their best practices with us.
Madam Chair Cano, it's a good question. The use of body cam is relatively new within law enforcement. You're looking at, I would probably say within 3 years is when we first started it throughout the country. You look at what we have here in the metro area. This is a rough guess. I would guess that about 50% of law enforcement agencies are using it here within the cities, within the metro area. So it's relatively new to technology that we're using. This policy that was written, people didn't really have guidance on it, didn't really understand it, didn't know what they should put in there. So I believe some of this policy was written off a IACP, International Association of Chiefs of Police, just a model policy. So, but again, when you kind of start something new, there's going to be hiccups and there's going to be things that come up that you need to address that maybe were not thought of. I really think that our policy and other agency policy are still in that infancy stage of understanding the different nuances within the policy that you need to address and that you need to work on. The data practices, if you've ever read the state statute, if you've ever seen that law, is very, very detail orientated. And to adapt your policy to that, you need a lawyer basically to help you navigate that policy. So there is currently we do not have anything in place to discuss with other agencies their policy, but it's something we could definitely look at in the future. It's probably a good idea to have those discussions with other agencies, other neighboring agencies, to kind of see what's worked for them, what type of issues they're having. But yeah, that's definitely something I think we may need to look at, and possibly that we can reach out to other agencies and try to get some feedback from them on what they're seeing, what they're doing, what we can do to address any issues we have or problems that arise.
Thank you. We have a question from Councilmember Ellison.
I just wanted to comment and say, I know that there probably is a degree of a learning curve to using technology like this, but it's probably not only that, right? To a certain extent, you get a new tool, you have a tough job, and to what degree do you think that there are a number of your officers that simply don't like this tool and don't want to use this tool because they haven't had to use it in the past?
Madam Chair Cano, Councilmember Ellison, it'd be really difficult for me to put a number on that, but I can tell you this, is that I remember back in the day when we started with the mobile video cameras. Officers did not want to have that, felt that it was not going to be a useful tool and useful technology. When we had GPS put in the squads, same thing. Officers felt it was not going to be helpful, wasn't going to do anything for them, did not want it. But they realized the importance of both pieces of technology within law enforcement. The mobile video recorders within a squad car definitely helped a lot of officers on complaints. It helped solidify what happened, what occurred on incidents, and was able to show exactly what happened in most cases. The GPS, again, you were able to use that to identify resources you needed, where they're at, any need for major incidents, what officers you had close, realize the importance of that technology. I think with the body-worn cameras, our officers are getting to understand that too, the importance of recording what's happening and how that is helping them. So there might have been an initial pushback on it, but when officers see the importance of it and what it captures and what it shows from their perspective, there's definitely more positive responses than we have had negative responses.
I appreciate that response. Thank you.
Alrighty, sounds like there are no more questions on this item. So we shall go ahead and approve the MPD's recommended metrics and deadlines for quarterly reporting, and also move to receive and file the report from MPD regarding the operation of body-worn cameras, the information on findings outlined in the audit report relating to this issue, and on supervisor reviews of body-worn camera footage. So all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those in opposition say no. And this item will move forward. So next item on our agenda is the internal audit progress report on body-worn camera. I'm sorry, this is the internal audit progress report on body-worn camera program audit issues. So please go ahead and walk us through this presentation.
Madam Chair, committee members, my name is Joe Vasilyev, and I am the manager in the internal audit department. I'd like to start off by saying thank you to DC Halverson, who said a lot of what I could have said, so I can keep my time talking a little bit shorter. I did want to start with a brief reminder of the background. This audit was first brought before this committee in August 12th, 2017, where the committee accepted a plan to conduct this audit. The audit focused on looking at compliance with state statutes, which were issued and state what departments and agencies using body-worn cameras in Minnesota must have as part of their policies and procedures. We looked at compliance with the policy, and we looked at reporting various metrics on how use has occurred within our police department. That report was received September 27th of last year, and the report findings are the 6 items listed below. Instances of noncompliance with policy were noted. We noted examples where the policy was incomplete, and that was primarily related to either state statute requirements of what must be in the written policy, or it was an area where something might be open to interpretation, and we thought everyone would benefit from a clarifying of language. Third area was managing access to the body camera data system. The fourth was related to data requests for body camera footage. The fifth was there was a couple of items that weren't in the written training materials. Not to say that it wasn't covered verbally, but we couldn't go to all dozens of training sessions that had been held to verify. And the last one was the access to where the mobile squad video footage was physically stored within the city. And again, DC Halverson went through each of these in detail. So I'll pause if there's any follow-up questions to me on these issues. Otherwise, I can continue with my report. So the progress to address the issues in the report. The main progress has been the work group that DC Halverson pulled together. It included myself and OPCR staff, as well as staff from MPD that specialize in writing policies. And the final draft is circulating currently internally with the police department. And based on that draft, any issue that was flagged in the report as needing to be changed in policy or that the policy could be clarified or improved was captured in that last draft that I saw. So I think that that's an important step. And the next steps as the response to the report that was just given include actually putting that policy out there and informing people. So that's where the training of individuals comes in. The other steps that have been taken to date include fleshing out what a supervisor review would look like, which will be which is in this final policy draft, and which supervisors were trained on towards the end of last year. I assume there'll be a refresh with the policy revision language, and I fully expect that the police department will put that in place and that it will help keep supervisors more appraised of what their reports are doing. And then the civilian reviewers steps that have been taken as well include bringing on 2 individuals that are, I believe, going through background checks, as DC Halverson talked about. And part of their responsibilities per the response to the report will include looking for those same issues that we were able to flag during our review of when is there an instance where video should exist but isn't, when are individuals not conducting their basic duties like labeling things properly, uploading them timely, doing their startup checks. And I also wanted to note that there was some discussion that has been had with other departments that run body camera footage by the police department to talk about things like how do they compare information and data. And I believe that while the current process is fairly manual and time consuming to try and identify when somebody should have had their camera on per the dispatch records, there's a possibility that we might be able, that the police department might be able to implement a more automated measure where we're able to kind of line those records up a little bit more with a little bit less effort. That slightly depends on how the technology looks and what the civilian reviewers are able to pull together when they start their jobs and actually get into the data. So we might be able to ease the burden on reporting some of those somewhat more qualitative areas later this year. But it depends. I did also want to flag that as part of our progress report, I do want to highlight that the police department did just provide the response to the audit report, which includes action steps with milestone dates. And as part of all of our audit processes, when there's findings, we do follow up on action items that the auditee puts out there to ensure that the audit doesn't just raise a bunch of issues that we tell people about, but that we're able to circle back and say, and this issue has been fixed. So that's this response that we just received will be kind of our basis for going forward and for looking at whether the MPD is resolving the issues that we identified in the report. With that, I feel it's appropriate for me to also note some of our next steps for internal audit on this issue. So we have had a lot of work with the policy draft and participated in other discussions, and we'll continue to do that as necessary if the reviewers of the current draft come back with comments or changes or suggestions. We'll definitely be involved to make sure that the issues identified in the report are still cleared up and that we're not reverting a little bit. And also some of the audit response did include discussions with other groups. So I expect that I'll be able to be helpful and informative in those discussions and will be a part of them so that as people have questions of what did this actually mean or what did this look like, I can answer that. And then finally, conduct the various follow-up review steps as the police department states that pieces of their plan is complete. So that includes looking at the final policy to make sure it's all covered, make sure that all the issues from the report are still covered and addressed in some way, reviewing the training materials to make sure that they've been updated to cover the policy completely and accurately, validating that the training and the new policy has actually been communicated to all the individuals in a reasonable manner, and then looking at those civilian and supervisor reviews that will be getting put into place to make sure that they're occurring and that the types of things that these reviewers are looking at would act, and the way they're doing their reviews would actually capture the issues that we identified. We will also be validating that the system access issues are resolved, including making sure that the written procedures for how to access the evidence.com system are functioning and that people are getting the appropriate authorizations. We'll be also looking at some of those other actions where it's more of a discussion. Let's see if this is possible to implement or not. For example, the two-factor authentication is not only an evidence.com issue to talk to them about, but also a practical issue of, do we want officers every time they're using their phones to flag a video, do we really want them to sit there and wait for a second factor to come in, or is that going to really degrade their ability to do their jobs and to do on-the-fly editing? So that might not be something that's really worth trying to implement just from a practical perspective. So just keeping an eye on how those discussions are going and making sure that if the end result is no, this doesn't make sense to implement, that it makes sense to not implement it. And that's my update.
So we will take a question from Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's really just a comment from my colleagues. I want to point out that I think it's really notable that our police department feels positively about the way they've been able to use Audit's report and continue to use Audit's help in remediation of these issues. And I also want to mention, because you were talking about best practices and perhaps other cities, that the work of our internal audit team late last year, it was written up as a best practice, and the Association of Local Government Auditors, which it is a thing, it's a big national thing. Our internal auditor, Will Tetzel, was highlighted in his write-up of how of auditing modern body camera programs, and we are a real innovator in this space. It is hard to gauge how are these body camera programs working, and there's different schools of thought. And I know that as we undertook this body camera program overall, there were differing schools of thought and different write-ups and different kinds of policing associations and journals and bodies of knowledge on the topic. So I just want to point out that this is a place that Audit has really shined, and that this is how we are contributing to that larger effort across the country as to how these programs can be effective.
I would like to just, comment that I knew the body camera program was new, but I didn't realize how new in the sort of cycle of the MPD world this was. So I really appreciate all the work that our MPD staff members and deputy chiefs and our chief himself have been doing on this front. But I do want to acknowledge that having you be a part of this process from our audit system, our audit perspective, it helps bring another set of eyes to, I think, a very important issue, not only for us as council members who have invested a lot of time and resources into this, but also to our residents who see that this is one of the primary ways that we can provide better services for our residents around issues of public safety and improved police community relations. And I really do appreciate all the time that you've spent working on this, and look forward to hearing more around the quarterly updates. Our committee will be seeing you both regularly, at least once a quarter on these issues. So thank you very much. This has been a very thorough presentation, and I look forward to seeing the progress and getting a firmer grasp on how we can be more supportive in this work too, as a committee. So, we have one question from Councilmember Ellison.
I just wanted to echo some of the praise that my colleague gave to yourself and to Chief Deputy Halverson, who I think have answered all of our questions really well. I also want to play devil's advocate a little bit and temper some of that praise by cautioning us that, you know, the bar might be a little low, right? So we're doing great, but I think that we can do better and would love it to we get to a state of normalcy with something like this. You know, if I send a text message to Councilmember Jenkins suggesting that Councilmember Fletcher should rock a mustache only, that kind of information is available to the public, right? And so understanding that, you know, like your officers, right? We're public servants. Your officers are public servants, and that getting to this bar of transparency really should be the norm, right? So, but thank you.
All righty, with no further questions and no further business before us, let's go ahead and receive and file this report. All those in approval, please say aye. Aye. And with no further business before us, we have adjourned our meeting. So thank you so much.